I'm the promoter, right? But I don't tell the fighter or the management team who they fight, right? So ultimately, Peter Khan's the manager, but it's going to really be up to Kambosos and his old man, because that's probably who's going to make the decision on who he fights. My job is to present him with various options, and here's the money you're going to make for each option, right? But if you're asking me the question, Lou Dibella's opinion, come on, Tank Davis is a much bigger fight. Not even close. It's multiples of it, right? It just is.
Of the street, though.
Who gives a fuck? What side of the street? What side of the street is Kambosos?
They give a fuck. He's not in Floyd's camp.
No, hold on.
Come on, Lou. You know the politics.
What side of the street is Kambosos on? I have no side of the street. That's why we have so much power right now. There is no side of the street. You think we're with the zone? I'm not with the zone. George is not with the zone.
There you go.
Okay.
There is no side of the street. We're not with Top Rank. We're not with the zone, and we're not with PBC.
You think Tank will take the fight? You think Tank will take that fight?
I don't know. I haven't pursued anything yet. Do I think that there is? I'm telling you, George is on no side of the street. Canelo is on no side of the street, and Canelo just made a shitload of money fighting on PBC. What side of the street is Canelo on? You know what side of the street Canelo's on? Canelo's on
side.
Canelo Street.
He's on Canelo side.
Street.
He's on Canelo Street. He's on Canelo Avenue. But there's a difference between George Kambosos and Canelo.
I don't care, though. I don't care if you're a 4-round fighter. If you have no tie to a network, you're on nobody's side of the street. And if you're on nobody's side of the street, you're on everybody's side of the street. And if you're on everybody's side of the street and you're Lou Dibella and you know everybody and you've done business with everybody, you can wind up on any side of the street. There's no impediment from George fighting anybody with any other company. That's one of the joys of the situation he's in. He's not locked into a particular side of the street. All you hear from the DAZN side of the street and Eddie Hearn is Devin Haney, Devin Haney, Devin Haney, Devin Haney, Devin Haney, Devin. Devin Haney needs George Kambosos more than George Kambosos needs Devin Haney. That's a fact. And there are a lot of alternatives. Also, George is a Greek Australian. And he lives in Australia. So he right now is a superstar when he gets off the plane in Australia and returns. And I know he wants to defend his title in Australia. So that's also going to be in our thinking. A sold-out arena or a stadium in Australia, could also be in his future. So we're going to look at a lot of options.
It's Lou Dibella, very spirited Lou Dibella, mapping out future plans for his boy George Kambosos Jr., the newly crowned unified Lineal and Ring Magazine lightweight champion of the world, who has no shortage of options at this time. Eddie Hearn seems determined to get his boy Devin Haney a crack at George. Shakur Stevenson, Ryan Garcia, they threw their names into the hat, and here we have Lou Dibella entertaining the possibility of a Gervonta Davis fight. We've already had this conversation, broad spectrum of it, in a previous video, more specific to these sound bites by way of the boxing voice, Lady Chan, Lou Dibella. How feasible is a Davis versus George Kambosos Jr. fight?
Lou seems to think it's entirely possible.
It is true. George Kambosos ain't a matchroom fighter. He's not tied to DAZN. He can go where he wants.
But that don't mean a Davis fight wouldn't have its own set of problems.
I think it would. George Kambosos post-fight after unseating and defeating the then unbeaten Teofimo Lopez said in plain English, if these guys want him, they're going to have to go to Australia to get him, because that's where he means to defend his newly obtained Alphabet and Ring Magazine titles. Do you think that Gervonta Davis is likely to board a plane?
Concede to being the B-side abroad.
Because Gervonta Davis ain't no fucking global star. He's a local attraction at best. I mean, he might be able to sell a couple of tickets and a couple of pay-per-views in America, but in the greatest scheme of things, he wouldn't be the A-side to George in Australia.
I'm not telling you the fight can't happen.
I'm assessing the likelihood of the fight happening. George paid the cost to be the boss, fighting on foreign soil, away from his native Australia. But now that he's the champion, based on his post-fight comments, I get the sense that he wants to be based out of Australia, moving forward. Thus,
if he sticks to his word, they're going to have to go down there to get him.
Those were his words, not mine. Lou Dibella himself, he might be very gung-ho for a Gervonta Davis showdown here in the United States, but how does George feel about that? How does George's father feel about that? How does Peter Khan?
How would they feel about conceding A-side status to Gervonta Davis?
Because he is going to assert himself as the A-side fighter. That is what both he, Leonard Ellerbe, and Floyd Mayweather Jr. are going to do, regardless of how monumental this win was for George, and regardless of how many Alphabet titles he's got.
Does George want to be the B-side to this
Sky.
Is being the B-side to Gervonta Davis here in America worth more to George than being the A-side down there, his native Australia? That's the question.
I think it's going to take a lot of zeros to convince him.
That's what I think, and I don't see Gervonta Davis, rather Gervonta Davis's opponents, I don't see those guys making life-altering money.
For all this A-side talk you hear about.
Anthony Joshua, Canelo Alvarez, these are the guys that can get you life-altering money, but not Gervonta Davis.
You really going to get fighting that guy?
The way I see it, Mayweather Promotions would have to present a generous enough offer to George Kambosos Jr. to get him to concede to being the B-side here in America, because in Australia, he'd be the A-side to a Gervonta Davis.
Nobody's expecting Gervonta Davis to go to Australia.
If a Kambosos Jr. versus Davis fight happens anywhere on the planet, it happens in America or it don't happen.
So that's what you have to ask yourself.
After everything George has already done, everything he's already been through, is he really willing to concede to being the B-side to Gervonta Davis in America for a few dollars?
What is Mayweather Promotions prepared to offer this guy?
Because they're going to have to offer him something. You know, when news broke that Heaven Daney, moving forward, would be a network and promotional free agent, what offers did Mayweather Promotions offer that guy? What'd they offer him?
Devin Haney makes very good money all by himself.
Without Gervonta Davis, and I don't recall hearing of any offers made to Devin Haney from Mayweather Promotions for a Gervonta Davis fight. I don't know that they offered that guy anything. If they did, I didn't hear about it. Did you?
And I've never heard of nobody making life-altering money off a Davis fight.
But I feel that life-altering money is what it would take to get George to concede to being the B-side to Gervonta Davis, to give up home field advantage.
To fight on somebody else's promotion in their neck of the woods.
Yeah, I think that's what it would take. A life-altering offer, life-altering money, because it seems to me like George, he wants to call the shots moving forward, and he's not just going to bow down and bend over for some peacock, some debutante in America.
When has Mayweather Promotions offered anybody life-altering money to fight Gervonta?
When has that ever happened? I mean, Lou Dibella seems to think that it's the biggest and best fight that can be made for George, but is it? Is it really?
Maybe that's the best fight that can be made for Lou.
At least from his perspective, as an American, maybe that's how he feels, but I don't know that George and his father, Peter Khan, I don't know that they share into that same sentiment. His victory, his monumental win over Teofimo Lopez ain't even a week old.
What kind of numbers could George do in Australia now that he's got those belts?
Look at the kind of numbers Tim Tszew's doing down there, with no belts at all.
So what can George do?
The other angle of this potential fight is that Gervonta Davis is currently in possession of 2 baby belts by way of the WBA. And 48 hours after the Cruz fight, should he emerge victorious, he's going to have to make a decision as to which version of those baby belts he wants to keep, the lightweight version or the super lightweight version. If Gervonta Davis so decides to hang on to the lightweight version of the title, it's conceivable that thereafter the WBA could order a fight between Gervonta Davis and George Kambosos.
You might be thinking that Gervonta's got him by the balls.
But now George has to fight him. That's what you're telling yourself, right?
Right.
Well, think about it this way.
Yeah.
If a fight gets ordered between Gervonta Davis and George Kambosos in this hypothetical scenario, and the two parties cannot reach a deal,
The fight will end up going to a purse bid.
and if it does, a bidding war could ensue. A bidding war that could see Mayweather Promotions losing all rights to the fight. Rights to go to the top rank if they place the winning bid, or a match room.
Do you think Mayweather Promotions wants that to happen?
See, the way I look at it, they'd have to offer George a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money, in order to reach a deal. Get him to concede to being the B-side here in America to afford Gervonta an opportunity at his alphabet titles, assuming Gervonta even wants that opportunity. But in this hypothetical scenario, well, they'd have to offer George a lot of money, and they'd have to do it in a timely fashion should a fight get ordered, because if they don't get a deal done in a timely fashion, fight goes to purse bid, and it's out there in the open market for Eddie Hearn to come along and snatch it up.
Just like he did with Lopez versus Kambosos.
And I reiterate, I've no recollection, none, of Gervonta Davis making sizable offers to big-name fighters, the somebodies at or around these weights. I have no recollection of Gervonta and Mayweather Promotions offering anybody
Big cash.
life-altering money. That being said, Davis versus Kambosos is possible. It is, like Lou Dibella says it is, though from where I'm sitting, it doesn't seem very likely. We'll see what happens. It's an interesting situation, to say the least. And welterweight news per tweet from Michael Bemson, Bob Arum says,
Terrence Crawford is clearly one of the best fighters in the world. Unfortunately, he hasn't shown to be a draw on pay-per-view. We've lost money on every fight. If he can make more money from some other company, he should take it. He'd be a fool not to.
It's about as honest an answer as you can expect to get. There are people out there that feel that Bob Arum and Top Rank have failed Terrence Crawford. A Twitter account that goes by the name Sue Can or Kansu says, surely your job as his promoter was to get his image out there, Bob. Imagine having a fighter that talented and not promoting him properly. This is an easy answer to what has not been an easy situation. Bob can plaster his face all over the ESPN offices and advertise his fights, whatever fight those are, though ultimately you can't fake an interest, the paying public's interest.
The paying public didn't want to see Crawford versus Brook.
Crawford versus Khan, or Crawford versus Porter, for that matter. Don't let social media fool you. Don't let those talking heads on Twitter or here on YouTube convince you that it's Crawford versus Porter that the paying public was demanding. What the paying public was demanding was Crawford versus Spence. And Bob can't deliver Terrence Crawford that fight on his own. He's got to have a willing dance partner. And for the longest time, Errol Spence Jr. has been unwilling.
Like I said, Terrence Crawford got to come across the street. Terrence Crawford got to come across the street. He got to leave ESPN and come to Showtime with Fox.
Can we get both of them in the ring? Can we get both of them in the ring?
He said, I'm fighting Mikey. Then I might fight Sean Porter, Keith Thurman.
So he didn't mention Terrence, huh?
He didn't.
Obviously, everyone's talking about Terrence Crawford. Is that a legitimate chance of happening, or do you guys feel like you're miles and miles apart?
I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about, seeing my kids tomorrow and chilling on my ranch and finally riding my horses after 10, 12 weeks and, just chilling out and eating some good food. So
I know you already talked about getting back to the ranch, very understandable. But what did you think of Terrence showing up ringside? Do you think that helped build some buzz to make it a big fight?
No. I don't know why he doing what he was doing here. I probably wouldn't go to none of his fights, so I'm not worried about Terrence Crawford, like I said.
Top Rank didn't fail Terrence Crawford. Boxing failed Terrence Crawford.
Boxing is a sport.
And its infrastructure. These are strange and confusing times when you have social media.
Twitter, Instagram.
Using social media as a metric, you would have thought that Crawford versus Porter would have done a lot better than what it did on pay-per-view. There are numbers out there, 135, 150, as high as 190, though nobody really believes it did all that well. And you would have thought that the pay-per-view would have performed a lot better than that based on social media metrics and what interest was being expressed there. But social media is free. The pay-per-view is not.
The only people that were clamoring for this fight were the people that don't buy pay-per-views.
It wasn't me and you. Guys like me and you were asking for Crawford versus Spence. It was Spence's fans that were asking for this, just so that when the fight gets made, they don't fucking buy it. Oh, I bought it. I got my receipt. But do they got theirs? The guys that were actually asking for this, saying that Crawford should have to fight Sean Porter first before he fights Errol Spence Jr. Well, he's fucking fought him, and you guys still aren't advocating for the fight.
It's clear that most of you didn't buy his last one, even though you were the ones that were asking for it.
Top Rank and Bob Arum, they didn't fail Terrence Crawford. Boxing did. Boxing's infrastructure, boxing as a sport that has become more and more political over the years. Fights that need to happen don't happen. Fighters get a pass for avoiding these kinds of fights.
Fighters like Errol Spence Jr.
This has been going on for 4 fucking years now. I want to make this clear. Sides of the street aren't the reason this fight hasn't happened yet. Because if that were the case, we never would have got Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 2 or 3. Tyson Fury wasn't with Bob Arum and Top Rank for the first fight. He didn't get with them till after the first fight, ahead of the second one. And sides of the street, they weren't a problem then.
Sides of the street are what a fighter says when he doesn't want to fight.
Sides of the street weren't a problem in Wilder versus Fury 2 or 3. Sides of the street wasn't a problem for Sean Porter. He just fought Terrence Crawford. Those words from Errol Spence Jr. from well over a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, those words are immortalized, will be immortalized if these two guys never fight, because that's how Errol Spence Jr. will be remembered. As a guy who in his prime sought refuge behind the politics of boxing. And I'm not about to sit here and argue with his butt boys, with his pom-pom waving sycophants who think he hails the moon and the stars for beating a battered Brooke and an overweight Mikey Garcia.
He never had any intention of fighting Terrence.
And when I say never, I mean never. Before the car accident and after the car accident. After the Danny Garcia fight, he had no intention of fighting Terrence Crawford. He didn't. Earlier this year, before his retina was detached en route to what was supposed to be a Pacquiao fight, he was supposed to be fighting Yordenis Ugas. And Ugas let that cat out of the bag that they had already signed contracts to do that fight. Not a unification match with Terrence Crawford. No, he was okay to unify with Ugas.
Months ago.
Ugas becomes Pacquiao. Spence starts training for the fight. His retina gets detached. Ugas stands in his place. The rest is history. And even after that, what are we hearing? That Errol Spence Jr. wanted to unify with Ugas
next year.
But
the WBA's four-man tournament got in the way of that.
And even with that, even with Ugas being all tied up with that four-man tournament, what are the Spence people doing to get Terrence Crawford in the ring? Because the guy you wanted to unify with, he's busy. He's not available to you. Not right now. Terrence is, and Terrence is a network and promotional free agent at this time. He's not on anybody's side of the street.
Well, you're the fucking A-side, so make him an offer, Mr. A-side.
And the whole bit about the eye injury and the inactivity, you can't use that as an excuse because he's okay to fight Ugas. So why is he not okay to fight Crawford? If you're okay to have one unification fight, why can't you have the other?
You're scared shitless of Terrence Crawford, that's why.
Given how things are going, if they can't get Ugas out of that four-man tournament to unify with Spence early next year, Spence is probably going to fight Keith Thurman, guy who's just about as inactive as he is, if not more.
He is more inactive than Errol.
I have to challenge the notion that it was Top Rank and Bob Arum that failed Terrence Crawford when nothing could be further from the truth. Top Rank did what they could in a very inconvenient situation, where the division is overrun with fighters that don't want to fight Terrence Crawford.
And they're using network politics as an excuse not to fight.
Bob Arum didn't fail Terrence Crawford. Boxing failed Terrence Crawford.